Good evening. I'm Ido Berger, faculty co-director of the science program at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute and professor of astronomy in the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Sciences. I'm thrilled to welcome you this evening to the keynote opening event of our annual science symposium, Power Shift: Energy Innovation, Sustainability, and Equity. The keynote conversation this evening and the symposium tomorrow are hybrid events, and I'm thrilled to see so many people here in the audience and to welcome those joining us virtually from all over the world. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all United Nations member states, emphasizes access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all as a critical path to combating climate change. Some renewable and alternative energy sources, such as solar, wind, and lithium batteries, are seeing increasing use, but additional energy sources are needed to meet capacity and to ensure equitable access. Pursuing a sustainable energy agenda necessitates producing energy more efficiently, more locally, and less harmfully to the environment and our communities. Our energy future requires radical innovations in energy production and distribution with an emphasis on the equitable division of benefits and burdens across global and local communities. Our science symposium brings together scientists, public officials, industry leaders, environmental justice advocates, and behavioral scientists to discuss exciting new developments and challenges at the frontiers of the energy revolution. This evening's keynote conversation and tomorrow's symposium are an integral part of the Harvard Radcliffe Institute's Climate Change Initiative, an effort to explore the impacts of the climate crisis through an interdisciplinary lens and to address issues of climate justice, particularly the disproportionate effects on marginalized communities locally and globally. Over the course of this initiative, conducted in tandem with efforts in every school across the university and in coordination with the Salada Institute for Climate and Sustainability, Radcliffe is gathering scholars, practitioners, and students to engage with issues that can be best understood and addressed by drawing on research from across multiple disciplines. For a full description of our commitment, including our many past and future public programs and exhibitions, visit the About the Institute page on the Radcliffe website and click on Our Work. This evening, we are fortunate to launch the Science Symposium with our keynote speaker, Melissa Hoffer, Climate Chief of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The position of Climate Chief and the associated Office of Climate Innovation and Resilience were created by executive order on January 6, 2023, the first day of Governor Maura Healey's administration. Indeed, Massachusetts is the first state in the nation to establish such a position at the cabinet level. In the words of Governor Healey, we have no time to delay. It's essential that we begin coordinating our climate policy across all state agencies and all communities in Massachusetts so that we can make the progress we so urgently need and drive our clean energy economy. Chief Hoffer and her team have been incredibly busy in the ensuing months, leading to a comprehensive set of recommendations focused on concrete strategies around funding, protecting environmental justice, and advancing workforce and economic development, summarized in the recommendations of the Climate Chief document in October 2023. In March 2024, Chief Hoffer, along with Massachusetts Transportation Secretary Monica Tibbetts-Nutt, submitted the Massachusetts Priority Climate Action Plan to the Environmental Protection Agency, noting that Massachusetts is boldly rethinking how its residents will power the electric grid, heat buildings, and move around communities in a fossil fuel-free future. With that, I would like to introduce this evening's keynote speaker. Melissa Hoffer, Massachusetts' first ever climate chief, received a JD from Northeastern University School of Law and a certificate in environmental management from Tufts University. She held senior roles at the Conservation Law Foundation and practiced as a litigator and environmental lawyer before joining the Massachusetts Attorney General's office as chief of the Environmental Protection Division in 2012 and as chief of the Energy and Environment Bureau in 2015. Subsequently, Hoffer joined the Biden administration, serving as the acting general counsel and principal deputy general counsel of the Environmental Protection Agency before returning to Massachusetts. Joining Chief Hoffer in conversation is Dr. Barbara Kates-Garnick, professor of the practice at the Fletcher School of Law and diplomacy at Tufts University and senior research fellow at Tufts Center for International Environment and Resources Policy. Dr. Kates-Garnick served as the Undersecretary of Energy for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and as the co-chair of Massachusetts Global Warming Solutions Act Implementation Advisory Committee. She has had an extensive career in energy, environment, and clean technology in both the private and public sectors. Before I turn the floor to Chief Hoffer and Dr. Kates-Garnick, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and our annual donors who are watching. Your generosity keeps Radcliffe programming free and open to the public, and we thank you. We also wish to gratefully recognize the Ardis Butler James Fund for Science, which is supporting the event. In addition, tonight's program and the seasonal refreshments that preceded it are co-sponsored by the Salada Institute for Climate and Sustainability at Harvard, and we thank them for their support. Audience members, whether in person here in the room or online, are welcomed and encouraged to submit questions at any time using the Slido link provided on the screen behind me and posted in the chat of the Zoom webinar. It is now my great pleasure to invite Melissa Hoffer and Barbara Kates-Garnick to the stage.
Good evening. First of all, thank you very much, Professor Berger and Dr. DeVivo, who serve as co-directors of the science program at the Harvard and Radcliffe Institute, and to the team at the Institute who have made this symposium possible. Energy, innovation, and sustainability and equity are really the cornerstones of the energy transition. And tonight, we are honored to begin our symposium's journey with a national leader in that transition, Chief Melissa Hoffer, who will provide us with a vision and a pathway forward, and a person who I have admired both as a colleague and from a distance over many years. What makes Chief Hoffer so insightful tonight is her perspective and her experience both as a policymaker and a lawyer, and these are two amazing ways of moving this transition forward. But I would like to take a quick moment to acknowledge my own mentor, a professor and inspiration, Mary Maples Dunn, a historian, academic, and lifelong advocate for women who led the Radcliffe Institute from 1995 to 1995 during the transition between Radcliffe and Harvard. For me, it is very important to acknowledge those who came before us and opened doors. And now to our keynote and our conversation. Melissa, you are the first climate chief in the nation within a governor's office, and that is the Office of Climate Innovation and Resilience, created on the first day of Governor Healey's term. So you are leading a way nationally. What does that mean to be a national role model for such work?
Well, thank you, Bobby, for that question, and thank you so much. It's an incredible privilege to be here with you this evening, and we were talking at dinner just about the generation of women who have been in this space in Massachusetts, and certainly Bobby among them, who I myself have looked up to. And I wanted to thank the Radcliffe Institute for sponsoring this event. It's really, truly a wonderful event, and I'm glad to be here. And before we get started, Norm Willard, can you raise your hand? I met Norm on my way in here tonight. Norm is a veteran, a 34-year veteran of EPA Region 1, who has focused on climate and climate policy while at Region 1. So that's what a climate hero looks like. Thank you, Norm, for your service. So my role might be the first cabinet-level climate chief in the country, but I guarantee you it won't be the last. You can see these roles being created. The city of Boston will be doing one soon. Michigan has something kind of akin to it. I met the Rome climate chief when the governor and I were in the Vatican this spring. And I think you will begin to see that type of a role inside of C-suites, in academic institutions, and in other institutions. And that's really simply because climate change is the defining megatrend of our time. It touches on everything. And so it will be very difficult for you to be engaged in any activity that isn't affected by climate change in one way or the other, whether that's finance or healthcare or education or whatnot. So this role is important, and I want to really also acknowledge the incredible leadership and mentorship of Gina McCarthy. And you think in the beginning of the Biden administration, President Biden created the first domestic office of climate policy, and Gina ran that, our very own Gina ran that for the first several years of the Biden administration. And that was an effort to incorporate climate change into all of the federal agencies. And if we're going to be thinking a little bit about, I'm standing on some pretty tall shoulders here, thinking about Doug Foy, and some of you might remember Commonwealth Development. That was Doug's effort to really begin to bring together transportation, housing, land use, and environmental policy. So there are some blueprints for this role in the past. And our goal here, Governor Healy's goal, is really to be injecting climate change into the DNA of all of the secretariats. So each of those secretariats has a core mission, whether it's the delivery of healthcare or public safety or maintaining our transportation system, our public transit system. Whatever that mission is, it now has climate change at its core. So when you think about it this is what I spent my winter holiday obsessed with, and I have a stack of reading materials, so if any of you are interested in this topic, come see me afterwards. This job fundamentally is a terrible job, because what you're doing is you're telling people to do things in a really different way from what they've ever done them before. So my job is sort of like interloper in chief. And what I'm doing is kind of checking out what they're doing, what are the opportunities for reduced emissions, are we really thinking about resilience? And it varies. When I got there, I really wasn't sure what to expect. And I got a couple calls in my first few weeks saying, well, we're so glad you're here. We have ideas about X, Y, and Z, and now we really want to run with them. What do we have to do? So there was sort of that end of the spectrum, and then there was kind of the other end of the spectrum, which is we don't really understand, what your role is. We're a little nervous about it. How's this all going to work? So, that is an adaptive management challenge. It's a leadership challenge, fundamentally, where we're coming into organizations that have been extremely competent at what they do for a very long time, and we're asking them to do things differently. So that is in part persuasion, it is in part modeling, it is in part relationships, but that's the challenge and the difficulty of this work.
Well, that really is a great lead into my next question, because first of all, we know that environment and climate are part of your DNA. You have been doing this for many years, and it is just part of who you are. But now you're in a different role. So my question is, there's resistance, as you just suggested. You're also a litigator by training. And my question is, how do you take on these different roles, both sort of from the litigation perspective, the policy perspective, and how do you put it all together in a way that you feel that you're effective and you feel that you're making change?
Well, when I worked at CLF, there was a guy there named Seth Kaplan. I don't know if you guys remember Seth, but Seth once told me, the real skill of a litigator is to be able to come up to speed very quickly on anything. And I think that's just about right. So in this role, I bring my litigator's curiosity. I really like to understand and have a command of the facts. I am very much driven by fact and data-based policy development. I think it's very important to get out of the realm of opinions of what is good or bad or what you think might be good or bad, and really kind of look at what the data say and make our decisions based on that. So I think those are some of the skills that come with just a lawyer's training and a litigator's training. But thinking about the other piece of it is consensus building, because it doesn't really, the governor has done two things in this executive order. It's available online if you want to see it. It's Executive Order 604. One was to create some administrative infrastructure. So that was to actually put people in place at each of the secretariats that are now responsible for implementing these recommendations that were referred to in the introduction and all of the other climate policy we're doing. So that gives our office, the Office of Climate Innovation and Resilience, people within each of those secretariats that are actually responsible for carrying out this climate mission. So that's thing one. You have to kind of think about, is the institution structured in a way to deliver what we want? The second thing that we did was create the climate cabinet. So I meet on a monthly basis with all the secretaries just about climate change. It's our monthly climate cabinet. We use that for a couple different purposes. One is we use it for education, because while we have people that are standouts and experts in their fields, people like Yvonne Howe, who are, Secretary of Economic Development, and like Pat Tutwiler, Secretary of Education. These are highly skilled professionals, but that doesn't mean they know everything there is to know about climate change or how climate change might affect what they're trying to do with their own core goals and missions. So we've brought in folks who've talked about mental health and climate change, have talked about systemic financial risk and climate change, real estate markets and climate change, best opportunities to partner with private sector and climate change. So lots of opportunity for learning together. We've also used that time to brainstorm about difficult issues, and we have a sub-climate cabinet meeting that is focused solely on deconflicting land use, because we have a goal of conserving, just to give you one example, 685,000 acres of forest land, agricultural land, and wetlands between now and 2050, just so that we can get the net emissions to get to net zero by 2050. Well, we also need to build a whole bunch of housing. We also want that housing to be close to transportation. We also have an economic development plan, particularly focused on climate tech, that has a vision for the whole state. So we're really trying to think about how all these things work together and coordinate so that, at least internally, we have a basis for some of that decision making. And I would say the other thing that we have done, when you come in as a climate chief, and there are already a whole group of people who have been working on climate, so those folks are largely within the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So there was a real need to create a structure there for what were going to be the things that we were working on together, how are we going to talk about those things, who would be involved in those decisions, and Secretary Tepper and I have put that structure in place so that we have a sense of teamwork. And it's a sense of working together, and there are clear lines of communication. So I think I think about them as administrative infrastructure, but those things are really important within an institution, and one reason why is because it can depersonalize, some of the changes that are happening. So just to give you a really concrete example about that, we're going to be changing some of our forestry practices. We did a Forests Climate Solutions Initiative last year, and I had the great opportunity to work with Undersecretary Stephanie Cooper. And this is really looking at our forest management practices to make sure that they are aligned with what our climate goals are. So that requires some cultural change to take place within our institutions. So making sure that we have people on board with that and that they know that their work is valued, and however the work was done in the past was okay. We're kind of taking a different direction now because that's what the science tells us we need to do, and to try to make it as neutral as possible so that we can gain buy-in over time.
So one of the interesting things about the energy transition is that you're dealing with the concept of incumbency. And incumbency comes in the form of utilities, it comes in the form of legal precedents, and the question really is, how do you make change? And I think this is one of the things that makes the challenge of the energy transition so difficult. How do you make change with incumbents and a system that has existed for them and by them for so many years, and then bring in the private sector? And already we're getting so many good questions in the chat. But how do you do this incumbency and change? So I think we will reconvene and have a very good conversation. And I think that what we just experienced, Melissa and I were talking, represents the complexity of these issues and how we deal with them and how we move forward and how we include people in a process. So I think that, we could start almost, Melissa, with that. And then we can move on to both audience questions to take advantage of having Melissa here. And then I have a few if the audience has their questions answered. So let's talk about the protest and what environmental protesting means and what it does and doesn't accomplish.
Yeah, so thanks for that question, and thanks everybody for staying. If you think back over the history, the progression of environmental law in the United States in particular has involved a lot of protests, particularly the environmental justice movement. And that started out down south at a place where there was going to be shipping of PCB-contaminated soils into a small town down south, which was largely African American. Bob Bullard, who some of you may know, one of the country's great environmental justice leaders, was part of that action to stop that from happening. So I really respect everybody's right to do that, and I think it's something that can really help move the needle as long as it stays nonviolent. That's really crucial. That's the bottom line. It always has to be nonviolent. And here, I was thinking, reflecting as we were sitting downstairs, Potsdam Institute is a German government-backed research institute. It's one of the leading climate change research institutions in the world. And they came out with a study in Nature in the spring. And that study found that by 2050, the global cost of responding to the emissions that have already happened, so we could turn off all the global warming machines today, and they're just talking about what's already occurred, $38 trillion annually. 19% wealth reduction globally by 2050. But what was really important to me about that study is that they found it is 6 times more expensive to respond to climate damages. And when I talk about climate damages, I mean things like we just saw with Hurricanes Helene and Milton, both of which will probably exceed $50 billion in damage. Hurricane Helene, mostly uninsured. So 6 times more expensive to respond to the damages from emissions that have largely come from fossil fuels than it would be to stay within the safer Paris target of 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. So that tells you it's a real bargain for us to be investing in the mitigation that we need to keep warming to a safer level. Right now, when you look at these folks and we look at, that generation, we're on target for a business as usual scenario. This is the IPCC's RCP of 8.5 for 3 degrees centigrade of warming by the end of the century. That's 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not only an ecological catastrophe, it's an economic catastrophe. So I understand where they're coming from, and we do need to move a lot faster. It's also really important to understand that there are 2 systems riding alongside each other right now. Bobby and I were talking about this a little bit at dinner. We have our economy running on fossil fuels. Let's just take last year, 2023. Half of new generation that came online was solar power. It broke a record. I've never seen that much before. It's a phenomenal, super encouraging statistic. And yet, primary fuels, those are the fuels we rely on or the fuels that we make electricity from, are still 83% of the grid. These are EIA statistics. So that tells us as much as we have the clean stuff coming online, the dirty stuff isn't going off fast enough. And that's not because we don't have the technology, and it isn't because we don't know how to do it. It gets back to this point of incumbency. And it also gets back to money in politics. It also gets back to moving fossil fuels off of a system when we've had a 40-year process of the world's most successful public relations campaign to get people to believe that climate change isn't happening. So you're still fighting against that. You still see denial happening now in the reactions to EPA's heavy-duty truck rules, which are going to not only electrify our heavy-duty trucks, but also reduce NOx pollution, right? That's the stuff that's really health-harming, cardiac, pulmonary. 350,000 premature deaths in the United States annually from fossil fuel pollution still. So when you think about these investments, the thing I really like to emphasize for people is that you shouldn't think about them as costs. They are investments. They come with monetizable health co-benefits. They come with monetizable energy cost savings. And now they come with the clear data that show us what the cost of the future avoided damages are. So it makes a lot of sense to do these things, and yet we have to really help people understand that, because I do think there's sort of, Barbara Deming referred to this as a tyranny over people's minds, but it's just the way you can kind of get hypnotized by the way things are, right? When you look around the room, it's so beautiful, everything looks lovely, we've had a gorgeous day today, how can things really be this wrong? But the reality is, it's not a choice between today, status quo, and paying a bunch of money to avoid some future damages. The current reality is a destabilized climate, and that will only become more destabilized with time. More and more expensive damages. 1 billion people estimated, and Zurich has gone, the insurance company has commented about this, estimated to be refugees, climate refugees by 2050. So that's why the Pentagon refers to it as a threat multiplier. It's why it's such a significant issue. So really figuring out how to rapidly move from fossil fuels is very, very important. So one way we do it is to try to make a competitive playing field for the clean stuff. That's the whole point of the Inflation Reduction Act. Another way to do it is to get the private money off the sidelines. That's another thing the Inflation Reduction Act is trying to do. So putting a whole bunch of federal subsidy in a way that attracts private investment to speed the transition. But as you have these two systems running next to each other, we still need, what are we, about 60% gas powering this electricity right now, tonight, here. And so you can't just shut that off. You know, we need our hospitals to operate. We need people to be able to have reliable communications. We need to be able to have the appliances, all the things that we rely on. So you can't just shut it off tomorrow. That would be unsafe. So the whole thing is to titrate that over time, very quickly, we're moving it down as the clean stuff is coming online. And that's why, you know, Governor has started this Office of Energy Transformation that's headed by Melissa Lavinson. We were very fortunate to get her to come from National Grid. Right. And her whole job is figuring out this transition off of gas. And when Secretary Tepper and I were at the AG's office, we petitioned for the opening of a docket at the DPU that would require our gas distribution utilities to tell us, what is your plan? What is your plan for getting to our state goal? And it's not a goal. Our state's statutory mandate, the Global Warming Solutions Act, was amended in 2021 to set a mandated net zero by 2050. What is your plan to align your gas distribution business with that outcome? And so the DPU in December of last year issued an order that makes it much more difficult to do gas expansions, makes it much more difficult for us to continue to invest in those gas pipelines, obviously for safety that's needed. But the whole thing is to begin to move us off in an expedited manner off of those gas systems. And we have other things we can do, like network geothermal, like our offshore wind industry, which, by the way, creates an incredible number of jobs. We have a huge number of jobs in Massachusetts now in the clean energy industry. So this is a positive story, but there's nuance to it. It's not a fossil fuels off tomorrow. And believe me, if I could turn fossil fuels off tomorrow, I would have done it yesterday. But that's not what we can do. We have to do it in a measured way, in a smart way, but as quickly as possible.
So can I ask you about the cost of this transition before, and then to get to the audience? Because, again, one of the topics is the issue of energy equity and who's paying for this transition and how are the costs allocated. And, you know, again, it just as you said, there's the infrastructure, there's the finance, but then there's the cost itself. And so yes, there's the job piece, and we're going to do, you know, much better on that. But people are going to have to pay for this, and that's where, you know, we need to also be thinking.
Yeah, I think that's really true, Bobby. And there's a couple things I want to say about it. You know, one is we're already paying for climate change. You can think of it in terms of a secret carbon tax, if you will, in terms of all of the bailouts. So setting aside Hurricane Helene and Milton, by September, we had already seen 20 $1 billion climate-driven extreme weather events in the United States. So we're already starting to pay for it. And of course, that is just the documented claims that come in. It doesn't necessarily capture lost earning capabilities or mental health impacts or things of that nature. So it's very expensive. Relying on fossil fuels is very expensive in terms of the health impacts that we discussed. There are a couple different things we're trying to do within state government right now and learning by some experimentation. At its most basic level, state government does sort of four things. We can convene people, we buy a lot of stuff, we give money away, and we regulate, just at the grossest level. And so we're trying to align how we're spending all of our money. So we're going through our procurement strategies so that we are trying to decarbonize our procurement or Scope 3 emissions as you think about those things. We're trying to think about how we are spending our money in terms of grant making so that we are investing consistent with our climate. But we're also trying to get a little bit smarter about it and thinking more about finance as a strategy. So I'll give you a clear example of that is with our Massachusetts Community Climate Bank. It's our state's first climate bank. Other states have climate banks. Connecticut gets a roughly 7-to-1 leverage ratio. So for every buck Connecticut puts in, they get about a $7 in private sector investment to do decarbonization. So very smart way to start doing things. We started ours focused solely on affordable housing because we very much feel like this has to be an equitable transition. We wanted to center folks who are already living in housing that might not be of the best quality. And that has like a natural finance cycle. So about every 10 years, you are going in, you are probably refinancing, and then you are doing things at those properties. Maybe you're putting in new windows and new doors or stuff like that. So the way we have to start thinking about all of these things, whether it's grid modernization or whether it's state of good repair for transportation, when you have that moment, and here we're talking about affordable housing, and we are going into those facilities, that's the moment to improve the building envelope at the same time. That's the moment to electrify, get those heat pumps in. And those heat pumps have a resilience benefit. For the Commonwealth's public housing, for example, most of which was built before I was born, many of it doesn't have air conditioning. And so when you put these heat pumps in, it also provides a resilience value because people can then have access to air conditioning, and sometimes these are folks for whom that is quite important because of pre-existing health conditions. So that finance model is like a very well understood, Mass Housing has been doing this forever. That's where we put the climate bank. They've been around since the early 1970s, I believe, and they've done billions of dollars worth of deals. So that's a known financial model, and now we are going to be layering into that capital stack some of these decarbonization dollars that are coming through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund at EPA, for example. So using these known finance models and integrating these new decarbonization revenues into them. So that's a little kind of like skunk works, if you will, that's teaching us about how we can do that in other areas of state government. Maryland, for example, is doing resilience authorities, and they have them at the county level, which is very interesting because then it's county by county debt that can be available. Those counties know what their folks need. And so when the applications come in for resilience projects, they're administering them. So that's very new. We'll see how that model plays out. But we have to start thinking about these things. And I want to talk about one other kind of model for this finance, and that's our Climate Careers Fund. So social finance is a socially responsible financing entity, essentially. And they approached us about creating a career fund for workforce development in the clean energy space. They have done this in a couple of other states. In New Jersey, for example, they have a fund that helps to fund healthcare jobs, IT training, and also green jobs. And so the idea was the state puts in half the money, and then we get about half the money from social finance. And that allows us to do some two things that we wouldn't normally be able to do. One is we can take, let's just take the worker that we're targeting for this first tranche of the program, which is somebody who already has a job but maybe isn't earning very much, has a real desire for some upskilling, wants to be working in the clean energy space, but maybe that person has childcare demands, maybe they don't have transportation to get to the training, maybe they don't have money for the tuition. So what we can do with this fund is two things. We can pay for the tuition, and we can do things like wraparound services. So we can pay for your daycare, we can buy your textbooks, we can arrange for your transportation, we can support you as you're going through this training. Then, once you've gotten a job, and we will work with you on job placement, and you reach a certain earning level, I think it's $45,000 a year, at that point, you start paying back the loan. And so with both of these models, we get the money back. So for the Green Bank, its first program, for example, is to, it's probably what we all need. It's a human being, comes to your house, looks at your house, does an audit, figures out what you need to do there, and then not only that, puts all the subsidy together for you, all the various state and federal subsidies, and then if there's still a delta, there's a low-interest loan that comes in its place, and you pay it back over time. That's revolutionary for states. We want to get more money back rather than just giving it all away. So thinking about finance in that regard is very important. And I guess the last thing I'll say about this, and we can talk in more detail if you want, Bobby, is my first recommendation in that if you're having trouble getting to sleep some night, you can read all the recommendations, all 86 single-space pages of them. But there is to really get our arms around the level of investment that is required to get to net zero. And Massachusetts is not unique in this regard, but we don't know. We don't know that. And because we don't know what that is, we can't really plan to adequately fund and finance what we need to do. So we are working with AECOM on that study now, and we have a companion study going with them that's similar on the resilience side.
So one of the interesting questions is the link between climate and health, and how we are working on those type of issues and what the administration is doing, because there is a lot of linkage that really needs to be clear and opportunities.
I love this question, and this was actually a really cool thing that came out of the Vatican Summit when we went. But there were some doctors there from the London School of Tropical Medicine and Health, and they approached me. I didn't realize this, some of you may know this, there is no standardized methodology for assessing the health co-benefits of climate policies. So the way that EPA does it is it really just looks at reductions in criteria pollutants. So what that means is if you have a climate policy that is phasing out coal-fired power, for example, you would look at the health benefits associated with the co-pollutants, things like NOx and SO2 and particulate matter. But there are many, many other benefits than just that. You think about mode shift in transportation. There are health benefits associated with that. You are walking more, whether you're taking transit now or whether you're biking more. You think about the health benefits associated not just with reducing that fossil fuel air pollution, but also shifting away from internal combustion engines and vehicles. So when I came back, I spoke with Carrie Nadal at the Harvard School of Public Health because she happens to know these people at the London School, and we got together and we said, would you be willing to help us think about what that methodology should be, because we can give it a test run for our climate pollution reduction grant. So we're very excited. I mean, it's kind of like unbelievable to have these brilliant minds helping Massachusetts, and maybe in our climate pollution reduction grant, that's the funding from EPA that is funding this work, perhaps we will be able to include that methodology as we are laying out the health co-benefits for purposes of that grant. And it could be a way to demonstrate to other states, because it's an important argument. We will move towards socializing the cost of climate change. I don't know where that will start. You see AB 32 in California, the Clean Power Plan, somewhat of an effort to move in that direction. But that will happen because it will have to. And so it's really important to understand the benefits of these policies and to be able to put a number on them. Jane Lubchenco, who some of you may remember used to run NOAA and is now at the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy. Those guys have been doing incredible work let's get super weedy for people in here who know, OMB Circular A4 sets out the whole way that we do cost-benefit analysis for federal regulations. every federal regulation has a regulatory impact assessment that comes with it, a RIA, that tells you the cost and benefits of doing that regulation. And what Jane has done is put in place standards for ecosystem valuation. This has been like the holy grail of environmental law for a very long time. So now when we're going to be doing something that's going to impact, an ecosystem, you want to understand, what functionality are you losing and what is the actual economic value of that? Forests, for example, the regrowth on the East Coast, we know are now providing about 3 degrees Fahrenheit of cooling in the summer months. So it's a big, giant free air conditioner at the same time that it is a big, giant free direct air capture system. So we can monetize that now thanks to the folks at OSTP. So I think these are really important things as we are thinking about moving towards these decarbonization investments.
So I don't know, we are essentially maybe coming out of time. But there is one other question that I thought was really somewhat important, and it may be a movement into some of the sessions that you're going to be having tomorrow here, but this whole notion of climate literacy improvement. What is it that we need to do? I also think that oftentimes it's that next generation, that younger generation, but what does climate literacy mean to help us move ahead on this very critical future for all of our existence?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and I have to channel the members of my Youth Climate Council. The governor established a Youth Climate Council in her first year, so these are high school students, and I'm just going to channel them. They are demanding K through 12 education on climate change for every subject matter. It's really, really important. It's really important. Secretary Tutwiler is also looking at that. And this would be, just as an addition, Secretary Tutwiler is already doing an innovation pathway for vocational training in the clean energy space. But this is different, because we will need the humanities, for example, to help us navigate these changes underway. Roy Scranton has written so beautifully about this. But these are very large transitions. Ram Ramanathan, the 50-year-plus climate scientist, physicist who first noticed some of the decay of the ozone layer and has worked to develop some of the first models projecting climate change. Ram has said that social transformation is the third leg of the stool. It's mitigation, adaptation, and getting people ready for the social transformation. So this education piece that you raise and the questioner raises, I guarantee you if we walked out into Harvard Square tonight and we randomly picked 10 people and we asked them what they thought was going to happen with climate change, I can almost guarantee you they are not thinking about the potential bankruptcy of states like Florida. They are not thinking about systemic financial risk. They are not thinking about the fact that we are facing, incredible economic destabilization. They are not thinking about climate migration. They might be thinking about polar bears. They might be thinking about solar power. So this is a manner where I feel like, particularly through high school, but also our institutions of higher education have much more to do to train people to deal with this, because it will be virtually unprecedented. And again, I think Harvard Business School just finished, if I remember correctly, about 2 weeks ago, its first model accounting standards that take climate change into effect. So you really can't think of a job that isn't a climate job right now. I was just here at Radcliffe about 2 weeks ago with Britt Ray and a number of other medical professionals helping to develop an assessment for climate anxiety and resilience, because those folks want to test the efficacy of contemplative practices for people who are dealing with climate anxiety. So you really can't think of a job that won't touch on it, and it is very important that we help people understand and begin to develop the skills and to reweave social fabric to deal with what's coming. Because what we do know from data is that communities that know each other, where the neighbors know each other, where the people know each other, they do better in a climate disaster, they do better preparing for it, and they make better decisions overall. So strengthening and teaching people those skills is very, very important.
Great. I'm just checking on our 5 more minutes. Oh, this is great. Okay, well, we have a few more questions that I think are really important. And one of those questions is, we may be going into a transitional period of time. What is the role of the states in terms of this energy transition, particularly if we find an administration in Washington that is hostile to the leadership that we're having in New England? What do we have in place now to get us through a period of time that may be difficult from a climate perspective?
Well, it's not the Supreme Court.
Yes.
I think the best strategy for anybody in the climate litigation space right now is keeping your case out of the Supreme Court. But really, you know, it's been this way for a while. Even during the Biden administration, it is an unbelievable miracle that we were able to see the passage of the IIJA and the IRA, really transformational pieces of legislation, and just incredible statecraft achieving those accomplishments. I think it remains very difficult to see any type of federal legislation around climate. And so what that means is it's really up to the states, and that is why I personally am back in state government. That is where the opportunities are. And let me tell you, you know, sometimes if you take the climate veil off things, you begin to just sort of, you know, set climate change aside and look at the energy transition. The red states are beating our pants off when it comes to wind. They are beating our pants off when it comes to renewable energy. And so that's really important, too, to look at, because it's just a better technology. So I think that this moment, as challenging as it is just filled with potent possibility. This is our moment. Because let's face it, like, things aren't working out that awesomely for many people right now. You know, we could really create a world that is much more equitable, that is healthier, that is powered by clean energy, that builds community and brings community back and helps us kind of remember why we're all here together. That is what is possible in this moment. I mean, the clean energy stuff is absolutely transformational. I was just this summer met a young woman at the Wyss Institute who is developing a microbe that eats nanoplastics. Okay? And maybe we're interested in piloting that at MWRA. We are looking at Boston Metal right here that is creating a process for decarbonized steel manufacture. We have Commonwealth Fusion that is maybe going to be the first to launch a fusion technology. We have many businesses like this in Massachusetts that are going to help us build that tomorrow. And so I think, as we're all nervous about it, and we heard tonight, you know, there's fear in this moment. And it is really incumbent upon us, and maybe us as elders, to help people hold that vision of what the good thing could be. What is possible for us? What is our vision, and what could we build in this moment? Because I know that it is possible. Technology's not the problem. We will figure out the financing. It's this adaptive leadership piece that we were talking about at the very beginning.
So I have one final question, and that is really about Massachusetts' role in a global society. The climate talks are coming up. I don't know whether you will be attending the climate talks, but how do you see Massachusetts in the global world? We talk about a lot of subnational policies. How do you see Massachusetts with our innovation, with our universities? How do you see us playing in the global future with all the work that you're doing?
I think we really help light the way, and you know, the governor speaks about this all the time, but Secretary Howe was speaking to a group last June, and we had our climate tech kickoff, and she was kind of kidding, saying, you know, the people from California couldn't believe that she and I are buddies because they don't get along, the economic development people and the climate people don't get along so well in California. And that is because I think we both really see it's not a spotted owl issue here. You don't have to pick between economic development and a safe climate future. They're the same thing. You really can't have economic, you know, development in a world that's destabilized by climate change. Just like I remember hearing the the CFO from Mars Candy one time. He was on a panel. He's just so great. I wish I could remember his name. But he said something like, it's really hard to sell candy bars in a world that is destabilized by climate change. It's like, right, like it's hard to sell everything in that world. So, you know, I think she really gets that they're kind of one and the same. And so we just dove in together on that bill and looking at the economic analysis together, and we work with Donahue together on that. And I think it's because we both really understand you don't have to pick, they're the same thing. So Massachusetts has led in a million different ways. You know, we've got our whole legacy of life sciences. We know how to do it. We have those ecosystems here. We have the academic institutions. We have the research and development. We have world-class laboratories. We can make those available to startup companies. We've got Mass CEC that has done, I think, 6,000 different internships over the course of the past few years in this clean energy space. So that piece we know. But also remember, Mass versus EPA. That was our very own now Associate Justice Milkey, who went to the Supreme Court and corrected Justice Scalia on the difference between the troposphere and the atmosphere during oral argument, okay? That was us, and that was the case that resulted in the Supreme Court saying that greenhouse gases may be regulated under the Clean Air Act, the Federal Clean Air Act. Reggie was the template, don't everybody forget, for the Clean Power Plan, the Federal Clean Power Plan. That's because we demonstrated in Massachusetts what that kind of a power sector regulated, the first regulated power sector cap and trade program in the country would look like. You know, I could go on and on with these examples, but we lead in policy. And let's not forget, we led in abolition. We led in civil rights. We led in women's suffrage. We know how to do these things. That is what we do. And I think we'll do that again in this space. We're already doing it.
I think that's a fabulous way to end. So thank you, Melissa.
Thank you very much, Chief Hoffer and Dr. Kates-Garnick, for the insightful and thought-provoking conversation and for your grace during this event. I, for one, feel more hopeful after listening to you. Thank you to our in-person and online audience for the terrific questions. I hope that you will join us again tomorrow morning for the continuation of our symposium. The day will begin with a panel about frontiers in energy science and technology, followed by a panel discussion about implementation and policy. And then after lunch, which will be provided free to all registered in-person attendees, we will have our final section on exploring societal impacts. We'll reconvene here in the Knaufel Center promptly at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time and online. And I hope to see you then. Good night and see you tomorrow.